Welcome to the Aerophone Academy podcast with me, Matt Trom.
And I'm Alistair Parnell. Join us each month as we discuss the wonderful world of wind controllers, and you get the very best information and answers to your questions.
The Aerophone Academy podcast is the source for accurate information on wind controllers.
So make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and while you're at it, why not check out www.isacs.academy
and patchmanmusic.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to episode 11. We are discussing synthesizer sounds, of course, driven from our wind synthesizer. And before we make a start, let's welcome our usual guest host, and that's Matt Trom. Welcome, Matt. How are you getting on?
Thanks, Alistair. Looking forward to this episode. This is one that we've been talking about for a while, and we were thinking, okay, we've done lots of the emulations, and now we could talk about strictly doing synthetic sounds on your wind controller. And Alistair, you had a great point when we were kind of talking about the show beforehand that this is a way that people can find their own voice, their own unique voice, as compared to trying to emulate a trumpet or a saxophone. There's a million unlimited ways you can go.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like for me anyway, the synthesizer sounds are the kind of true voice of a wind synthesizer. Of course, it's very helpful, and we can enjoy playing those emulative sounds. But for me, playing a synthesizer sound is where I feel that's where I get my own personal voice for the instrument. And sometimes I feel perhaps people are a little bit reluctant to investigate the synthesizer sounds, perhaps because very often I think they maybe just haven't listened to enough really good demonstrations of those sounds. I mean, we all know about the huge names. We're going to talk about some of those huge names in this episode, the Michael Breckers, the Judd Miller, But have they really listened very carefully to some of those recordings? Maybe not. And I think once they can listen to those recordings and really appreciate the sort of sounds these guys are making, I'm sure, like the two of us, they'll fall in love with those sounds and hopefully want to investigate them more. That's what we're here to do for this episode, I reckon.
Yeah, I have to say, as you were saying that, I was just remembering back to my days, early days when I was playing with my jazz groups and the larger groups, and I always thought, I have to sound like a sax or a flute or a flugelhorn, and I was always afraid to try any kind of synthetic sound, and I'm thinking that the audience wants to hear realistic sounds, and I'm not sure that was a correct assumption. I think as long as it's expressive and it fits the music, I think it's played well, I think it's fine. But I had my own aversion to doing synthetic sounds. Now, there's some people that have an aversion to emulating sounds, and they don't want to sound like a saxophone or a real instrument, thinking that they're going to take a job away from an actual sax player or whatever. But I think I was kind of the opposite as I think about it. Did you ever have a problem with that, thinking, oh boy, is the public going to really want to hear this weird sound?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, but I think, like I say, listening to some of those great players play and realizing, and for me, this is where the wind synthesizer really shines, that you can be so expressive with those synthesizer sounds that they really take on a personality of their own. And I think if you learn to play a wind synth really expressively, then, really any sound can work really, really well. But for me, particularly those synth sounds. So yeah, it gives us a chance, I think, for us to find our own voice. And of course, there are so many different variations in the synth world. We've got endless possibilities. I mean, there's, thousands and thousands of sounds we can make, and you'll never get through the list of possibilities. And that's another great thing, that we can actually choose which sound we prefer. And we're going to talk about some of our own personal sounds and play some demonstrations of us playing those sounds as well. So plenty of things to look forward to in this episode. We said, Matt, that we might actually look at, some of the great players, and maybe that's the place for us to start, do you think? Shall we start looking at some of those inspirational players that have really led us to be head over heels with those synth sounds.
Absolutely. Let's see, who can we go back to? I guess Nyle Steiner is one of the very first.
Absolutely.
Since he essentially invented it. There's a clip of Nyle Steiner demonstrating some of his sounds that he was doing on an old analog Steinerphone synth that he made in a suitcase. And it's just a simple sawtooth wave or square wave with a great filter. And, you listen to him play. And if it's played right, that little sawtooth can really sound like a trumpet or whatever. He's so talented at that. So maybe we should talk about that a little bit. It's a clip. Nyle Steiner, it was from 1983. He was over in France, I believe,
right,
playing a concert over there with Vladimir Yusachevsky, I believe, and 1983. So here he is playing a little bit of a sawtooth on his analog synth, but listen to how wonderfully acoustic this sounds.
That's amazing.
Little Maynard Ferguson there at the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
40 some years ago.
Yes, incredible.
Yeah, no samples, just an analog synthesizer. Yeah. So there's another clip. It was actually from an LP that they did. He recorded a Yusachevsky piece called Four Studies for Clarinet and EVI. In 1989, they recorded an LP with F. Gerard Errante. Am I saying that name correctly?
Well, that's, sounds as good as I could say it.
And he is on the clarinet, and Nyle Steiner is on the on his EVI playing like a trumpet type sound. Maybe we can listen to that now too.
Yeah. Yeah, and a really good example of how you can certainly blend those synthesizer sound with acoustic instruments, right?
Exactly. That's what I was thinking too. It's not so much about the timbre that he's playing, but how it just blends with the acoustic instrument. To me, flawlessly. It's wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. It's we did a piece with our Equinox saxophone ensemble, which was written by a guy over here called Nigel Wood, called Partial Eclipse. And actually, we could put a little bit of that in here as well as a sort of similar idea. This is with 9-piece saxophone group, which I run, called the Equinox Saxophone Ensemble. And I'm actually playing the wind synthesizer with this is done on an aerophone. In fact, it was done on the AE10 originally. And another example of how well we can blend instruments, both acoustic and a true synthesizer sound.
So I did want to mention that if a person that plays wind controller is inclined to try programming or at least tweaking sounds, that it's another way that they can make their own voice, their own personality. You could take a sound that I did or Alistair did or whatever, and change it around and find something that appeals to you. And you don't have to, be a master programmer to do that, to just find little things and find your own voice.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's some quite easy things initially that you can do that can quite radically change the sound, or even, just slightly change the sound, which can make the world of a difference to the way you want to play it. So, you're talking about things like the filter and the resonance, and usually they're fairly easy little tweaks to make on an instrument or an interface. And then, you save your own version of it. And that's what you and I do, Matt, probably pretty much all the time. And even depending on certain pieces of music, I'll play you a demo slightly later of a recording I did where I did just that. I just felt for this one particular piece, the sound just needed to be, just not quite so bright, just a little bit warmer sounding. So all I had to do is just slightly change the filter control, and then you've just got the sound that you think fits that one piece. And again, that's another great thing about your synthesizer repertoire. You can take one particular sound, but you can have quite a lot of variations, as many as you like, and that might suit one piece in particular, and you might choose something brighter or different for another piece. So you've got endless possibilities, and it's finding your own voice.
Yeah, it's kind of like a sax player looking for a certain type of sax or a mouthpiece or reed or neck on their sax or trumpet mouthpiece. It's you find these little subtle things that you like, or maybe you prefer one synthesizer over another. I just like that sound because it's a little warmer than this other one, and so yeah, it helps to experiment sometimes too, and sometimes you have to go through a few iterations of a wind controller rig before you find something that you really like a lot.
But perhaps with one advantage over that scenario that you were just talking about, where a sax player might experiment with different reeds or mouthpieces or whatever. Of course, then you've got the problem, and I'm talking as a saxophone player, you've got this quite obvious variation sometimes, because different reeds, you buy a box of 10 reeds and they're all going to feel slightly different. And one day this reed might feel good on this mouthpiece, but then it won't feel so good the next day. Usually, of course, on a wind synthesizer, because, you've got these sounds actually saved, you can be pretty sure that you're going to get the exact same sound again if it's a digital setup on the synthesizer. So that gives you a nice bit of confidence to know that you've saved that sound, you'll get exactly that sound back tomorrow. And that's something you can't always guarantee on an acoustic instrument. And some people would say, well, that's a great thing about acoustic instruments. Yes, but there's also the downside of I don't quite know how that's going to sound, the next day. So having your sound saved into your sound bank, you can recall it in the same way, and that's your own sound. So, talking of your own sounds, let's have a look at some of the sort of players, certainly the players that are been very influential to us, and hopefully, if you've not listened to some of these guys playing, you really ought to, and we're going to help you along the way because we've got some demos of them playing. So we thought we might move on to somebody like Bob Mintzer. Do you think, Matt?
Yeah, let's talk about Bob for a minute. He's a longtime EWI player. He started back, I guess, in the late 80s. He had the first Akai EWI 1000 model, and he recorded quite a bit with that, with the Yellow Jackets. And now he's moved on to the EWI 4000, and that seems to be his instrument of choice. The EWI 4000, of course, it's a digital synth inside this instrument, but it's analog modeling type digital synth, and it feels very analog when you play it. It's a fantastic response. In fact, Bob, he's a good friend of mine now, and I've worked with him working on his horns and things, and he proud to say he uses my sounds for the EWI 4000 exclusively, and he loves them.
Yes.
In fact, when he was in Cleveland a couple years ago, I brought an EWI 5000 with me, put it in the car, and I said, "Hey, Bob, I got a 5000 out in the car if you want to just plug it in and try it." And he was not interested in the 5000 because it has it's more emulative and it has samples and it's not based off of that analog model. And he just really prefers the analog sound. So as far as I know, he doesn't really have a lot of he really doesn't want to get into emulation that much with his Wind controller. But we have a nice clip of him fitting in with a big band. Now he's been with the WDR big band in Cologne, Germany for many years as their guest conductor there and composer and arranger. He's doing great things over there. And check him out on YouTube. This WDR big band is incredible. This clip here was from a Grammy-nominated CD from 2022 with the WDR big band and the Yellow Jackets combined on the CD. And this track is called One Day. And he's playing the EWI 4000 with one of my sounds in it. Just thought you might like to hear this with an EWI blended in with a big band very tastefully.
Great stuff. I just love that. Again, a brilliant mix, a blend of that synthesizer sound with acoustic instruments, and it just sounds great.
I agree. He's a master. Yeah, he's just using the EWI 4000 by itself. No sound modules anymore. He likes to keep it simple and just put it in a gig bag on his back and carry it on the airplane, I guess. So he's been very happy with that. Again, he has no desire to do anything more than that.
Sure.
That's his voice.
I think I did see an interview. He was talking about this, and yeah, absolutely, he says about the 4000. And I believe I'm right in saying that he very often sticks to relatively few sounds. He's got maybe half a dozen sounds that he enjoys playing, and but he's really learned to play those sounds very, very well and get so much expression and precision of technique, of course, but of articulation, and that's something that's always going to come up with any sound, that the way that you articulate a sound, the way you use the dynamics in the sound. And he's just got that half a dozen sound, but wow, he makes this amazing sound on all of them. He really knows them well. Yeah,
I'm proud to say that I've asked him several times, and he says, no, those are your straight sounds. But he's just picked the ones that he likes. I know there's one that kind of overblows as you blow it. I honestly, I can't remember the name of it, but I know it's in the bank. It's the one where you overblow it and it jumps an octave, and it's this really fuzzy, beautiful sound. But the only thing he might have done was maybe pull down some of the reverb, because when he's playing live, I think he prefers to have it a little more dry and let the sound guy control that. But it's just he's found his collection in there that he likes, and that became his signature.
We also want to keep talking, I think, about this, the way that we make our own sounds. And, you've already mentioned, say, about a saxophone player and, how you might create the sound. And, I've been teaching saxophone for 40 years. And it's always the thing, I think, that I say to my pupils, well, how do you know what you want to sound like if you haven't heard that sound? If you can listen to some players and think, I really like that guy's sound, or you might like one person's sound for the way he does a certain thing, high notes, low notes, vibrato, whatever. I want to blend that with somebody else's sound when he does, staccato or whatever it is. But you form your own sound, and without that aim, without that goal in your head, that blueprint to aim for, then inevitably you're going to be quite lost. And this is why I think we really want to encourage people to listen more to players that are using synthesizer sounds, because if you hear people like Bob Mintzer, we're going to hear Brecker shortly as well. Once you've heard those sounds, then this is certainly what happened to me. Then I start trying to emulate that sound, and that's what really gives you that focus to start to get into the synthesizer sounds, if that's something you haven't really got into yet.
Yeah. Should we go to maybe an older recording of Michael Brecker playing his famous Iwi solo?
So this is probably the most famous recording, right? Steps Ahead, Magnetic, 1986. And this is very famous for WinSynth players. This is his amazing recording of In a Sentimental Mood. So actually, a little story about that. That was definitely the track that got me into playing wind synthesizers. 1986 was when I was at music college in London, and I knew a house full of jazz musicians similar age to me, and it was them actually that said, "Oh, surely you've heard the Michael Brecker In a Sentimental Mood," and at that point I'd never come across it. And of course, when I heard that, I was absolutely blown away. And that was definitely the track that started me on the road with wind synthesizers. Was it similar for you, Matt, or you were probably into it a little before that?
The very first time I heard a wind synthesizer was in probably 1982, 3, something like that at college. There was my good friend Brian Gaber, who teaches down at Florida State University.
Okay.
And I think we mentioned him in one of the early episodes. Mm-hmm. And he brought a Krumar EVI to a jazz jam at one of the local hamburger sandwich shops there on a Thursday night. And I watched him play it very tastefully. And he was playing jazz, and I was blown away because I had dreamed about an electronic trumpet, but I didn't know it existed. I didn't know anything about Nyle Steiner. So that was the first time I heard it. And Brecker came in later on, and all these great players. So I had a little bit of a different history.
Yeah.
But this recording by Michael Brecker, I would say that's probably, one of the definitive earliest wind controller recordings that really, really took it somewhere. Wouldn't you say? That's a very special recording.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have another clip here that we talked about Michael Brecker playing original Rays from his Michael Brecker album. I think this was his debut solo album after he had done so much studio work. So this came out the next year in 1987 under his own name. And he's playing these chords, and he figured out this with Robbie Kilgore, his programmer, and Judd Miller, and they all worked together, and they got these kind of rotating chords that were happening as you play a note. The chord underneath would change, and the bass note would hop around. And this was, talk about game changer. Let's listen to this.
maybe we should just explain a little bit more about what's going on. That is just Brecker playing one note at a time on his instrument, but the synthesizer that it's connected to, that's what's creating the harmony, and that has a part in it that is changing some of the notes automatically in a certain sequence, sometimes randomly, sometimes it goes in a specific order. Perhaps not everybody would realise quite what's going on there. And if you are fairly new to wind synthesizers, perhaps you won't be picking up on the fact that those notes are changing. So even when he just repeats the same note over and over again, the notes underneath the note that he's fingering, those notes are changing as well. So there's quite a bit going on there. Perhaps to the novice, it's not always obvious quite what's going on. So hopefully that explains a little bit more clearly what happens in that sort of a sound.
Yeah, Michael was using his Iwi, so 87. It could have been the Akai. It could have been the Steinerphone. Might have been the Steinerphone made by Nyle Steiner, but then he's triggering an Oberheim expander or a Matrix 12. They're basically the same thing. The Matrix 12 is 2 expanders, and that expander has been programmed to with the chords and with that rotation mode working and doing all kinds of special things. But yeah, that's a single performance of one person playing. There's no overdubs on that. Just a lot of layers and a lot of really clever programming.
Yeah, and extremely clever playing as well, might we add.
For sure.
But yeah, all of those come together to make an amazing solo sound like that.
So we should say the Aerophone, getting back to the Aerophone, AE20 and AE30 on some of the sounds that I voiced for the factory that are included in those instruments has the rotating feature very similar to what you're hearing in that trend-setting recording there in 1987. The synthesizers have finally caught up to where you can put it all inside of one instrument. Yeah. So there's several of those rotating chords built into the factory presets in the Roland AE20 and AE30. So do check them out. They're a lot of fun to play. You can play for hours with those things. So here's a quick demo of those sounds in the Roland AE30.
Yeah, as you were saying, Matt, the Aerophones, the AE20 and AE30, the synthesizer that they have inside those instruments is, pretty amazing. If you think about, I know we're talking about 40 years after Brecker recorded that stuff, but we now have a considerable amount of synthesizer power just in the instrument itself without any external gear. I've got a couple of demos here that I did of a couple of sound banks that Matt did for the AEZ series. These are ones from the Roland Cloud. And this is a little demo first of the synthesizer set from the AEZ01. And it's kind of a continuous track that I did. So we'll just start this off and you can have a listen to the first couple of sounds on this. Yeah, so you can hear already that there's a tremendous amount of variation there. Pick one of those sounds that you like and start working on it to get its full expressive capabilities. And here's a little bit of the second bank, the AEZ02. Similar idea. I kind of did a little bit of a track and just kind of switched through each of the 10 sounds that are included in there. I believe those first 2 banks are actually free. If you've got an AE20 or an AE30, you can download these for free from the Roland Cloud.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so plenty of variation, and again, you can take any one of those sounds, and if you want to make slight adjustments to it, you can certainly do that and save that as your own sound. So you can more or less think of those as, of course, they're great presets, but they can be great starting places as well to experiment and make your own versions of those sounds.
So there's a couple sounds that are kind of standardized or wind controller type sounds that you see in a lot of sound banks that are for wind controllers. And we thought maybe we'd highlight a couple of those too. One of them is sort of the classic Judd Miller sound. Judd Miller we had on our show last 2 episodes. Yes. A really excellent series of interviews with him. Studio legend, EVI legend. But he had this sound that was kind of a, 2 sawtooths and one kind of blipped a little bit in pitch and came back down, kind of a doubling effect, kind of a brassy sound, but it became sort of a standard wind controller timbre that people like. So here's what it sounds like. Here's just a real short clip of it. So we've all heard that one a million times.
Yeah.
And there's another kind of a variation on that. I don't know which one came first. They were probably pretty close to being at the same time. Lyle Mays with the Pat Metheny group, Lyle Mays was the famous keyboard player with Pat Metheny. He's now deceased. Fantastic talent, and he added a lot to that group. But he had this kind of a sound very similar to that, but it was with square waves, so it has more of a hollow clarinety kind of sound. So here's his version of that. And here's a version of it with within the recordings with Pat Metheny, a couple songs that he recorded with him. So that's the famous song called Are You Going With Me from the Off Ramp album by Pat Metheny, 1981. Beautiful, beautiful piece of music.
Yeah.
Masterpiece. This other one is called Facing West from 1992 with Pat Metheny Group.
I was just thinking, Matt, do you think we said we would go into the area of talking about how, some people prefer synthesizer sounds, some people prefer emulation sounds. And actually, people can have quite strong views on that, right? I mean, I've certainly got people in my iSax Academy, they're really only interested in doing emulative sounds, and some of them really not into the synthesizer sounds at all. And I just thought, listening to those Lyle Mays sounds there, and the fact that you've introduced those as Lyle Mays sounds, and, those people that know that music, yeah, that's his sound. That was one of his sounds he used. Do you think that perhaps if people aren't so comfortable with synthesizer sounds, it's because they struggle to, if you like, name them or categorize them? Perhaps they just feel that there's this whole world that they don't understand and don't quite, they can't quite sort of categorize it properly. So maybe I don't know, not that they're afraid of it, but they don't quite understand it, or they can't quite label it. And so that makes it a bit more difficult for them to get into. Do you think there's some truth in that?
Sure, maybe that fear of the unknown.
Yes.
There's no reason to fear it, but a lot of horn players, classical players, or young players, and they just grew up in high school learning trumpet. They don't really know about the world of synthesis, and so maybe they're afraid of that and they find it intimidating.
Yeah.
But it's just another timbre, and it's fun to explore it, and you can spend your whole life learning, and it's just a beautiful thing.
I don't know about you, but if someone says to me, "Oh, can you play a trumpet sound or a violin sound?" then I tend to be a little bit more, I think perhaps initially at least, I'm thinking more about, how do I make this sound like a violin? How do I make it sound like a trumpet? And then, you've got a whole load of thoughts that you've got to take on board to try and, if you like, abide by that acoustic instrument's physiology, if you like. You're trying to imitate it, right? And that doesn't have to be, limiting in any way musically, but I tend to find that if I'm on a synthesizer sound, I don't really have to think about that stuff. I can think about just getting the best from the sound that I've got. No one's going to judge me and say, "Oh, you don't sound like a so-and-so," because no, I'm going to sound like a synthesizer. And therefore, it feels to me like, the handcuffs have been taken off. I'm free to do whatever I like. No one's going to judge my synthesizer sound. Is that the same for you?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's like if you say, "Oh, I'm imitating a saxophone now." As soon as you say that, then everybody knows what a sax is supposed to sound like, and they're going to say, "No, that's not close." You have that mental image of what a saxophone sounds like, and you're judged against that. It's kind of like you're trying. We used this analogy in a previous episode where everybody knows what the Mona Lisa looks like. So if you're saying, "Oh, I'm emulating the Mona Lisa,"
yes,
well, then you better be pretty good at it, because everybody knows what it looks like, and
yeah.
There's only one real Mona Lisa that you can go after. But if you're saying, "Oh, I'm emulating a synth stack," that could be anything. So it's wide open, and there's a whole lot less stress too, I think, if you are not trying to emulate.
Yes.
It can be very what's the word I'm looking for?
You're talking about being free.
Very freeing.
Yes.
Very, it releases all those preconceived things that you have to work towards. And when you're playing a saxophone, you have to always think, "Oh, would a sax player play this?"
Yes.
Whereas if you're doing a synth, there is no preconceived notion, and it really does free you up to do things.
So, Matt, do you have your own kind of favorite sounds, or are you like me? You've perhaps got a few sounds that you tend to use more often. Do you have some favorites?
Yeah, I was thinking about it in terms of non-emulations. I always gravitate towards that simple sawtooth, brassy sound with a filter on it. Real simple one oscillator. Like I say, trumpet, trombone, flugelhorny kind of sound.
Yes.
I also like sounds that you can overblow, like when you blow a penny whistle or a recorder, and it kind of jumps over the octave as you blow. I love that kind of transition into the octave. And while you're playing lines, it's kind of going back and forth between the two octaves.
Yes.
I love that effect. Also layering. I really like to layer sounds, and that's where the fun comes in as far as I'm concerned, when you layer more than one timbre and experiment with things. But maybe we could play a couple things. I have a couple clips that I did with that simple sawtooth, the sound that I always gravitate towards. And I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people that like that. So here's a piece that I just recorded, a Chuck Mangione classic called Chase the Clouds Away a couple years ago. And I'm playing to a backing track, but it's essentially that sound. Maybe I may have layered a second one just in unison with it, but this will give you an idea. It's nothing special. It's just kind of a nice brassy kind of sound. I think it works very well, and I can't imagine people having a problem listening to that.
No,
over an actual flugelhorn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really nicely played, very expressive. I was just thinking, Matt, as I was listening to that. I don't know if you've ever thought about this yourself, but I'm not sure. But I think I could probably tell the difference if someone's playing an EVI or a woodwind type controller. What do you think about that? Yeah?
Interesting. I'll bet you that has a lot to do with fingering patterns and also vibrato.
I think so. And articulation, I think, to some extent.
Ah,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But no, I reckon...
Yeah, it'd be fun to hear you play that. We should both play it and just see what the differences are.
That would be a good comparison, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's one other clip that I picked, and then let's get to yours. Maybe
sure.
I'll do mine and get them out of the way.
Yeah.
So the next one I did, there's a piece that I recorded with my daughter. It's Christmas, My Favorite Things. Yeah, it was couple years ago. It was just a little recording we did, and she's singing, and I'm playing some parts in the background that are actually, I believe they're FM8, the
yes.
Native Instruments FM8. It's an FM synthesizer, but this is kind of an unusual FM sound. It's a real breathy FM sound. But this will kind of give you an idea of some things that are not, certainly not emulative, but they're not generally considered synthetic too. They're more, I don't know, just effecty almost.
Okay, let's have a listen.
Girls in white dresses with blue satin sashes, snowflakes that stay on my nose and eyelashes, silver white winters that melt into springs. These are a few of my favorite things. When the dog bites, when the bee stings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad.
Oh, that's nice. I like that. She's got a great voice as well.
Thank you. Very, very talented young lady, I may say.
Absolutely. Yeah, lovely. You should make an album together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd love to. Yeah. Well, let's hear some of the things you've chosen of yours. What do you like?
Yeah, okay. Well, similar kind of thing. I kind of fall back on that that saw wave quite a lot. But like you say, it's kind of variations, I guess, on that. I'll play you a couple of little bits here This is actually one that I guess for me as well, because I'm a keyboard player, and very often, the backing tracks that I do, I kind of make those myself as well. So that very often leads me to a certain sound that I think hopefully fits with the kind of tone and kind of character of the piece. So here's a little example. And I quite like that little bit of kind of breathy sound. It gives you that sort of organic sort of sound to the attack, which is lovely. And by the way, just a little small point there, that's one of the preset sounds on the AE30. Can't remember the name of it. But what I'm doing on that version there is the backing track is actually being played directly off the AE30 as well. It's actually a sample that I took from the Phantom keyboard. I recorded it onto the Phantom keyboard, exported it as a sample onto the AE30, and I trigger that basically as works like a drone effectively, plays in the background while I solo over the top. So the whole of that demonstration is purely just AE30. There's no other sequencer or whatever doing the backing track.
Oh, very clever. I love it. It's kind of a voicey kind of breathy sound.
Yes.
And who knows what it is? You can't really classify it, but it's perfectly acoustic sounding as far as I'm concerned, and expressive.
Yeah.
As much as anything.
Yeah. And I quite like a little bit of a kind of funky kind of track. And here's a little bit of that. And again, it rather depends on the speed of the track. If you need something with a little bit more kind of speed of attack, and you just got to get the right balance of, I guess, the timbre where it sits within the track as well, so it blends quite nicely. And
and folks might recognize that as one of our segue pieces for the Aerophone podcast.
That's right. We use some of that in our links in our podcast. And one of my favorite tracks here, this is a little bit of that Joni Mitchell track from Both Sides Now. This is the version that she did, more recently. She recorded this as a new version, and I've always loved this arrangement. And this, again, is, I think, is that CR hard lead on the AE20, AE30. Very, very slight change in the filter, just to kind of slightly warm up the sound a little bit. This is the first little bit of that track.
of a flugelhorny kind of sound on that.
Yeah, it's just nice and warm. I just wanted it to sit there in the mix. And
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's just lovely to play those sounds. You can really just relax into them and just concentrate on the way that you're playing them. And I think we've mentioned this before, Matt. Sometimes you get somebody that, they'll hear a track that you've done or something, and they very often sort of say, oh, what sound is that? What sound is that? And it's almost as if, they think we have some kind of secret about the sound, or, we have our own kind of tweaks to everything. And very often I'm saying, this is just the preset sound. And I do feel that very often we can slip into the kind of dangerous area, if you like, of searching for another bit of kit or another sound, or we're constantly thinking it's the equipment that's going to make us sound good. And of course, as we know very well, it basically comes down to practice, listening, and working hard on those sounds to really get the most expression that you can out of it. And sometimes I think there's a danger we try to look for too many gadgets and bits and bobs. Concentrate on just a few really nice sounds that you enjoy playing, and work on them a lot, and get used to exactly what their parameters are and how you can control them. That for me is the key to making a good sound on a synthesizer, sound on a wind synth.
I agree, but I will say I was listening to that and I was thinking, could I imagine a keyboardist playing this exactly like that? And I can't.
No.
It's just, there's something about a wind controller. There's these little subtle bends and little subtle vibratos and
Yes.
Changes in breath level and stuff.
Absolutely.
And fingering and slurring that you're just not going to get on a keyboard.
I agree.
And
Definitely.
I think in that case, the equipment, the instrument basically is making a difference.
Yes.
But of course, any sound can be played poorly or badly. You can take the most expressive wind controller sound that responds to breath and just blow super loud.
Yes.
All the time and just not take a breath, and it'll sound like a synthesizer. I guarantee you 110%.
Yep.
It won't work.
Yep.
So, yes, it has to be played correctly.
Yeah. Get yourself a decent wind synth. Get yourself some good sounds to start off with, and then work on them and work on your expression. That's the message, I think.
Yeah, I want to say one more thing too. When we talked about finding your own voice, and the other thing also is very much related to the way a sax player picks an instrument or a reed or mouthpiece, is the amplifier. And we have talked about it in the past, but the amplifier is where all the sound's coming out of, essentially on stage.
Yeah.
So that speaker is part of your instrument.
Absolutely.
So, you want to get an amp that sounds good to your ears. I've found that you want to stay away from guitar amps or bass amps that are tweaked just for electric guitars. Now, acoustic guitar amps, they're probably okay because they're more full range and they usually have a tweeter and a full range. But it's really important to have a full range amp, a vocal type amp or a PA type amp or a good keyboard type amp. And you may have to go out and try a few, or go to a store and try them. And you just don't know which one's going to sound good. It could be the best amp in the world, but it might not sound good with your particular rig.
Sure.
So that's pretty critical.
Yeah.
You have to point that out.
Absolutely. And so talking about sort of, more of those options for sound banks and things, what about some of your other sound banks, Matt? You've got some favorite sort of sound banks that you've produced so many over the years, but you've got some demonstrations lined up for us, I think, of some of the ones that you like to play.
I kind of went through my library that I've done over the decades and found some that are based on analog synthesizers and aren't necessarily emulative type synthesizers. So here's some just parts of the audio demos. Now, these audio demos, you can hear the full version on the patchmanmusic.com website. But here's one. Well, the most recent one of all of the ones that I picked would be for the Korg Mono Poly soft synth, which you can get from Korg. And they usually run a sale on those things at half price. And they always run sales a couple times a year. It's like $50 to get the synth. And I did 2 banks of sounds for the Korg Mono Poly. So here's a little clip from some of those demos. Here's another one for the Apple ES2 synth. Now, we've mentioned this in the past, and I've mentioned it several times because it's just a really expressive analog modeling synthesizer. It responds really well. Apple did a great job programming it, and I did a full bank of sounds for that are designed to respond to breath for the Apple ES2 soft synth, which plugs into Apple Logic or MainStage. Here's a little example of that demo. And here's a quick demo of some of the sounds that I did for the Akai EWI 4000S. Now, these are the same sounds Bob Mintzer uses with the Yellow Jackets and all his recordings for many years, actually.
Now, we also have had a question from a listener, which isn't really related to the subject of this podcast, but nevertheless, we love to get your questions. We have a thing called a speak pipe, and that's when you can actually download or upload, should I say, your question. So let's have a listen to the question that's coming from a listener, I believe from the Netherlands.
Hi, Alistair. This is Jelle Wils from the Netherlands. I was wondering how Aerophone could help me with my saxophone technique. Specifically, do you have any exercises you could recommend to work on my technique? Because I do find that flapping my hands or having the fingers too far from the keys causes more problems on Aerophone than on saxophone, but the other way around. Sometimes some technique is easier actually on the Aerophone than on an acoustic saxophone because all the keys are at a similar distance from the instrument. So any specific exercises you could recommend, I'd much appreciate. Thank you.
Well, Jelle, I hope I've said that name something like correct. Thank you for that question. In fact, this is something that comes up quite regularly on the forums and things. Inevitably, I think if you really want to improve your saxophone playing, you're probably better to use your time, practicing that acoustic instrument. But I have got a couple of suggestions for you. They're quite simple suggestions, but they are things that are going to need a little bit of patience and thought. The first one is in terms of finger movement, an exercise that I give my saxophone pupils and also WinSynth pupils as well. If you play something like a easy scale really very slowly and as an experiment, see if you can release the keys as you lift a key up for each note of the scale, but see if you can remain in contact with the actual key button. So you'll end up not losing contact with the actual key itself. You're taking the pressure off to release the key, but you're not moving your finger off the actual key itself. It's harder than it sounds, but it really is a good way of getting some discipline as to not moving those fingers too far. Remember, the further away from the keys you move, the further you've got to get back to your next note. So minimizing movement is always going to be a plus. And the other thing that I find causes a lot of movement, and that is, we have our opposing thumb mechanism. And this is something that we actually find quite tricky to move our thumb or our fingers independently, particularly, of course, for the left hand as a WinSynth woodwind type player. And something you can do as a very simple test is, can you practice, even without the instrument, keeping your fingers still and independently just moving your thumb? Or the other way round, keep your thumb still and just independently moving your fingers. I very often find people are sort of grabbing too hard, almost too violently when they're using their thumb to change octaves. And so again, there's extra movement there that isn't really necessary. So I hope that gives you a little bit of something to think about. Basically, keeping your hand posture relaxed and trying to minimize movement. That's where it's at. I think the parting words that I'd like to leave with listeners is, particularly if you're someone that hasn't really explored the synthesizer sounds on the Wind synthesizer, then I'd really encourage you to listen a little bit more, to start to play some of those sounds and to experiment with being very expressive with those sounds. I'd really like it if, after you'd listened to this episode, that's at least going to make you think, well, you know what, I'll go and try one of those nice saw lead sounds and see if I can play even just a nice slow tune on it and just experiment with just what you can get out of it for expression. I'm sure once you've started that journey, hopefully like Matt and I, you'll begin to really enjoy playing those synthesizer sounds.
So, Alistair, we always want to mention our ventures that we have, and you, of course, have the iSax Academy, which is, I think, an outstanding resource for wind controller players. And you talk about tweaking sounds and making changes to sounds. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do in these courses?
Yeah, so in that advanced course, it's specifically really for the AE20, AE30. You know, we don't get into like the depths of filters and resonance and things. You know, we talk more about some pretty easy ways that you can combine some of the sounds and use some of the features on those two instruments. And the examples there are very nicely set up, just very easy, straightforward instructions where I'm showing you exactly step by step. You can download a PDF with the instructions on. And of course, once you've done that a couple of times following the course there, you can get on to doing your own versions of those sounds pretty easily. So yes, if you have one of those Roland Aerophones, an AE20 or AE30, and you'd like to just understand a little bit more about using that editor app and how you can make your own combinations of sounds, then please visit the isax.academy.
And of course, if you're looking for sounds for various hardware and software synthesizers, or if you're looking to purchase a wind controller, Patchman Music is here. I'm here for you. Within the US, I can ship you the Aerophones. I carry the AE20s and AE30s and the other models as well. And of course, the sound banks can be shipped anywhere in the world, so that's not a problem going overseas on those. That's patchmanmusic.com.
Okay, Matt, I think we've had another interesting episode. There's actually quite a lot more we could talk about in synthesizer sounds that we haven't touched on today. We can certainly have another episode because we hope to be doing this for some time to come. In the meantime, we look forward to our next episode, episode 12, and we hope to be looking at our kind of dream controller, wind controller rig. We'll talk about our own setups that we have, things we might want to see in the future. So please join us for that next episode if that's something you'd feel you'd be interested in. And of course, don't forget, you can send us a message, leave us one of those voicemail messages if you like to, and let us know what your dream rig would be, and we'll listen to your ideas as well. See if we can't influence some of those big companies, eh, Matt?
Absolutely. So thanks again, and we'll look forward to the next episode. Take care, Alistair.
Thanks, Matt. See you next time. Bye.